Watch out, let me get a shot. Where they at? Where they at?
On that rooftop. Hey! Give me a fucking 42 in here, not a city!
We're east of the riverbed, and we're taking fire from the west. Roger, stand by, we're popping smoke. Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Well, welcome, folks, to the podcast. Today, we're honored to have John Ligato, a Marine Corps veteran of Vietnam, and in particular, the Battle of Hue City, which many of you will know to be, it was considered the gold standard for urban combat for a very, very long time. Ferocious battle, incredible stories of heroism, Marines fighting, and their South Vietnamese counterparts just fighting against all odds. John had a very short but action-packed career in the Marine Corps, then went on to serve in the FBI. He's got such a rich background, I'm not even going to attempt to do the biography. I'm going to turn it over to John. And John, welcome. And could you give us about 60 or 90 seconds of the cliff notes of your illustrious career?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I grew up in South Philly, which came in handy later on with the FBI because I spent a lot of time undercover with the Italian mafia. But I was the first person in my large Italian family to get accepted to college in 1965. In 1966, I was the first person in my large Italian family to get expelled from college. And the closest I got to a 4.0 was my blood alcohol level. But if anybody remembers the mid-60s, draft notices were going out every 30 days, and you could not get in the Air Force, Navy. They had 1 year waiting list. My parents were poor. They couldn't pull any strings for the reserve. So I joined the Marine Corps, and best move of my life. But anyway, I went in the Marines and went right over to Vietnam after boot camp and ITR. I mean, back then you went through a little training, you went home 30 days, and boom, Vietnam. And I was fortunate enough to be assigned to Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that, so I'll go on after the Marines. I got wounded, and I was expelled. So I wrote the college president a letter from a hospital bed in the Philippines telling him that I've learned the error of my ways. So he let me back in school. I got my bachelor's and master's, and then for 10 years I worked with severely handicapped children, developmentally disabled. And people ask me, what was the most rewarding job you had? Marines, FBI, I've had college teaching. And I always say it was working those 10 years. It was just very rewarding. So after that, I had my master's degree and joined the FBI and spent 8 years in deep cover and 5 years as a pilot, and got out. I've been writing books. I'm working on my 6th book, and I taught college at Camp Lejeune for Campbell University. I taught counterterrorism. I taught 9 years at a community college in Cleveland, and that's all I can think of right now, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's more than enough. Very interesting. I mean, any one of those is an admirable career. John, I think you know that this podcast is really aimed at company level and below. I like to say those warriors most likely to have to fix bayonets in an engagement. The people we're trying to reach right now with your lessons and all the other episodes are really today's equivalent and 10 years equivalent of the Marines of Alpha 1-1, before combat. They haven't been there, haven't done that. They maybe can talk to some combat vets, but they're getting scarce again. And so that's the whole genesis of this podcast. Is this would have been great for you and your mates to listen to in '67 maybe, or 66, before most of you got into serious combat. Imagine if you were able to listen to several episodes of Gunny Canley prior to hitting Vietnam. That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, it's really noble. And you know what? You never know if you reach one person and they snap into something somebody said on your show while in combat. It could happen.
No, you're exactly right. I often say that if something you say during these episodes, John, sticks in someone's mind and he remembers it 10 years from now in a very dark, dangerous place, and it causes him to take an action or to not do something stupid, and therefore save lives and achieve the mission, it's all worth it. And you just never know. I know what we're about to hear from you. There's going to be many, golden nuggets there. And so I thank you for being willing to share your rich experiences. Trust me, I wanted to learn everything I could about you guys in Ray City. I would talk to anyone, pre-internet. I would talk to anyone that was there. I grilled, Ray Smith mercilessly about details, asking about Canley and Sergeant Gonzalez and, the scheme of maneuver and all of that. So really thank you for being here. And with that, I always start off with a question. Could you just tell the young folks out there, if you were limited to 2, 3, 4 sentences, what's the cliff notes? What's your leadership philosophy? If someone came to you in person and said, John, you were a Marine, you were a combat Marine, you led Marines in combat, you saw other leaders, based upon all that you saw there, and then learned in your subsequent careers, what's the high level definition of a leader? What's your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, that's interesting. Somebody with integrity. Without integrity, you can't lead. Someone who's consistent, someone that'll be there with you. And you talk about some great leaders like Ray Smith. They didn't lead from a swivel chair or from the rear. And someone that understands the troops, because without the troops, especially in Vietnam, the officer ranks or the leaders wouldn't make it. We were, all junior enlisted Marines, and they were totally dependent on us.
Yeah. John, the age-old question, are leaders born or made?
They cannot be made. You can attend 1,000 leadership classes. You can learn to lead, but you can't be a leader. I mean, it's like a world-class athlete in my mind. I had this conversation with a professional football player, and it was my contention you're born with that extra thing that made you professional, because I could play football 24 hours a day for 10 years and never make it past the college or high school level. So that there is such a thing as a born leader.
I agree with that. I also want to ask you, for those that you got exposed to some fantastic leaders during your time in the Marine Corps, and I would say probably the ones that I'm thinking about were really born leaders that also learned a lot. Do you feel that someone with the maybe not a Ray Smith or a Canley or whatever, just the average person with an aptitude for leadership and a desire to really learn, can they learn to at least become an effective combat leader?
Yes, they can. But I don't know the percentage of that. I don't know if we choose leaders based on leadership qualities. I mean, we're in bureaucracies, whether it's the Marine Corps or the FBI, and sometimes we don't make good choices. But as you said, I was so fortunate in my time in Vietnam to be surrounded by the legends of the Marine Corps. I mean, the legends of the Marine Corps. But at the time, I didn't know. I just assumed that every Marine company had the same leaders.
Not hardly. And we're going to get into that. Before we do, though, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, personal questions. I'm sure on the way to Vietnam, you had your ideas of what combat was going to be like. And then you got there and truly learned what it was like over a sustained period. What was the differences between your pre-combat, idea of what it was going to be and your post-combat? What really sticks out in your mind? Like, man, I thought it was going to be this, and it was none of that, but I didn't even expect this, and it was a lot of that. What really hit you hard?
Well, I think that most people, their expectation of combat is from movies. Gunny Canley, who won the Medal of Honor, went at 13 years old to see Sands of Iwo Jima, and he stole his brother's birth certificate and joined the Marines at 15 based on that movie. So, I'm in my 70s, and I think our generation, I remember everybody in my neighborhood being in World War II or Korea, and then when Vietnam came, most of the neighborhood that could joined. It was an inner city Philadelphia neighborhood. As far as once I got there, I was amazed at the Marine Corps back then. If you were a corporal, you were a god. I mean, these guys were amazing, and I was a PFC. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was there a week, and I said I had to go to the head. I'm in the bush, and my Corporal Rubio gave me an entrenching tool. He told me, go outside the perimeter and do your business. So I'm there a week, and I dig a little hole, and two things happen. One is, if you've ever had to go number two in the bush, you got to make sure you extend your butt out. So I didn't. So two things happened. One is I was crapping in my pants, and C rations are not the best. It's not very solid poop. But then the NBA started an artillery attack, and I froze. I could remember in the crouch, and I put my helmet as far as it would go over my head, and I just froze. And I remember somebody grabbed my ear, and I looked up. It was this Corporal Rubio. He ran from his cover, ran outside the perimeter, grabbed me by the ear, and brought me back in.
Wow. So
one of the things, and then the other thing about combat that you could never duplicate is the smell and the sound and of combat. And you could smell blood. You could smell the coppery smell of blood. It's amazing that the Marines in the 60s and World War II and Korea didn't have air protection. We didn't have air protection. So, the sounds and smells were amazing.
You bring up a good point. I want to hit on this a little bit, or just remind the audience, most of whom I think are going to be young, and I think this thing's going to, this episode is going to be listened to 50 years from now, John. I don't know what the internet's going to look like, but it's going to be out there. This podcast's going to be out there, and everything that I learned about pre-combat and my actual combat experience is just like a half of a pinhead compared to yours and the folks that were with you. Is everybody dwells on, what you've seen and all that. And I talk to really hardcore combat experience guys. They also say, some of the things that stick with me the most are things I heard and things that I smelled. And those remind me of some graphically bad times. So,
the other thing, these people listening, junior Marines listening, you don't know what you're going to do or what your friends are going to do once that shit hits the fan. And I say that because some people that I thought, would be wimps, judging by, they were just nice people, you know what I mean? We're like the Audie Murphys, and, some of the big talkers, certainly weren't cowards, but they weren't, so you don't know what you're going to do until you are shot at.
You bring up two good points, and I was going to ask you about one of them. The first is, the eternal question everybody asks. I'm sure you asked yourself, when I get there, am I going to do okay? When I first bullet flies by me, am I going to get okay, or am I going to freeze and choke? Am I going to be a coward or whatever? Any thoughts on what to tell the young fellas?
You'll do your training. Yeah, the Marine Corps is the best, and the training is so good that you'll revert back to become muscle memory, like a golf swing or something, if you do it 10 million times. And I never saw a Marine, in having PTSD or battle fatigue, or everybody did their job to different degrees. I mean, I had 2 Medal of Honors with me. One day they both won the Medal of Honor, basically. So now you have that standard, and then you might have the guy that lifts his weapon up over the bunker and fires. That's the other extreme. But Marines will do what other Marines have done since 1775, because if you think about it, since 1775, hundreds of thousands of Marines, millions, have been in combat, and they do the right thing.
Yeah. Leads me to the second question that you brought this issue up. I think, and I was one of them, a young Marine, no combat experience. When I enlisted, John, in 1974, there were still World War II veterans in the ranks, the senior guys, first sergeants, sergeants major. There were World War II, Korea, and of course a ton of Vietnam vets. And my initial inclination as an 18-year-old was one of almost idol worship, and then after about a year and a half or so, I realized, this guy might have been in Vietnam. And he may have even been decorated. He may have even been a hero at a certain point in time, but he's not that good of a leader right now. In fact, he's a bad leader, or he's an ass to us, or whatever. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. You were certainly with people that deserved to be highly respected and kind of put on a different shelf apart from other folks. But you've also seen folks that, they've got the fruit salad, so to speak, but you saw them really, and I don't want you to get personal, but you saw people who, the meal didn't quite match the menu, so to speak.
Well, it's interesting you say that. If you can remember back in the 60s, the Marine Corps had the lowest GCT score. There were the guy in the bunk below at boot camp had a big bandage on his back, and I finally got to ask him what was it, and he looked at me and said knife fight. He had got into a knife fight. He went to court, was arrested, went to court, and back in the 60s, a Marine recruiter would be at court, and he'd have it hooked up with the judge, that the judge would give the choice of jail or the Marines. My partner in Vietnam couldn't read or write. I would write his letters for us. Now, I would not want either one of them back in garrison, but I'll tell you what, they were amazing in combat. And so I think we have a generation and we have individuals that you should only break the glass and let them out when there's a war on.
Yeah, I agree with that. And those individuals, they definitely have a hard time in today's military. In fact, they probably aren't going to make it long enough to stay in for the war to happen and the glass to break. It's just a totally different environment than, but I think, John, you were, like you said, you enlisted boot camp, ITR or whatever they called it back then, and then you were in Vietnam, and then did you do a 13-month tour?
No, I got hit 3 times.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. I went to a hospital in the Philippines. I spent about 3 or 4 months in a hospital, and then I was on casual duty in the Philippines, and then I got out. They let me out a year early. Yeah. I was no good to them because back then, if you had 3 Purple Hearts, you couldn't go back. And I tried to go back. I had that sort of survivor's guilt that I wanted to rejoin the outfit, but they wouldn't. They just discharged me, and I went right back to college.
Yeah. I want to change directions a little bit and ask you about mental toughness in combat. The will to endure. And you've certainly been in situations with your buddies that were, really nearly impossible when you look at it. I mean, you went to Hawaii City, and I did a little research for this podcast, and I saw a little film snippet of you saying that, when we went to the MACV compound, they were applauding us like we're here to, these guys are here to save the day. What we didn't know, there was 10,000 NVA waiting for us. there was a lot of mental toughness demonstrated, resilience, guts, grit, whatever you want to call it. How important is that in getting through combat and winning? And do you think there's anything you can do to develop that prior to combat?
Well, I mean, you can be mentally tough in grade school or high school. You can spot kids that are mentally tough. A lot of females are mentally tough. In fact, a lot of them are more mentally tough than us. But I think that once you get in that situation, I mean, what are your choices if you really think about it? I believe that most Marines, after their training, when they get into combat, act instinctively. So in other words, there's so much chaos. Combat's so much chaos. You only see it through your eyes. Like, I went back and wrote a book on Way, and I got to interview guys I was with at Way. And to hear them tell the stories and fill it out of what was going on, like something as simple as the first day in Way City, we were in a house surrounding the MACD compound, and the gunny came by. We had no officers. Our officers were gone. So the company commander was an E7. So anyway, he comes by, and it's pitch dark, and the NVA was literally across the street, literally in French hopes. And I said, "How's it look, Gunny?" And he says, "Not good, Ligato." And then he walked off. So I'm interviewing people for the book, and my buddy Larry Lewis was at the next window. And he said, I heard your exchange with the gunny, and when he said that, because the gunny was a Medal of Honor winner, I started looking for the Mississippi River to get back to Tennessee. So I had so many of those examples where I could put myself where I was, but then I got a complete picture of the other guys. And Larry Lewis did something at Way City that an Army sergeant got the Medal of Honor for a few months ago, about a year ago. He did the same thing. He jumped in a house full of NVA, engaged a bunch of them, killed them, and seized all these weapons, and I never knew that.
Wow. We'll talk about awards later on, and this continues to this day, the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. As you know, John, you're in deep combat. People are getting hit. Witnesses are getting killed and wounded. And it's not like you have time to whip out a ballpoint pen and start writing a summary of action right there. And unfortunately, a lot of heroic acts go unrecorded. They don't necessarily go unnoticed, but they go unrecorded. So I've talked to many, especially from the Vietnam and World War II guys and all of that. I learned during my time as a young Marine to know that there's a lot of folks out there, their senior award might be the combat action ribbon and maybe a Purple Heart, but that doesn't necessarily mean that guy did not perform heroically. Sometimes sometimes they just get lost in the shuffle. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, example, Way City was a 31-day battle. So it wasn't like a lot of Medal of Honors are won in a few minutes. And then there's time. We had 31 days of constant firefights. I'll bet you 70 or 80 firefights during that 31 days, some 2-3 a day. So the other thing that happened, and Ray Smith found out about this, is that at the end of the Way City, they wrote up a bunch of people, and some first lieutenant had a bunch of Valor Awards in his footlocker that he never turned in. So I give an example. Gunny Canley was written up for the Navy Cross, and it was tossed. And then Ray Smith rewrote it up about 2 years later based on hearsay, and he got the Navy Cross. So for whatever reason, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I look at the guys I serve with, and the other thing is, if you have 2 Medal of Honor winners out of 100 guys,
yeah,
what are the other 98 doing? You know what I'm saying? In the first day of Way, Canley and Sergeant Gonzalez charged 2 NVA machine gun nests. and we were in a ambush. We couldn't go right, we couldn't retreat back, we couldn't go left, and machine guns were hitting us head on. And they were in rice paddies, and they charged they used the swale, the rice paddy, to within 20 yards and eliminated them with hand grenades. Now, visualize this. Where were the rest of us, the 98? Were we like hunkered down? No, we were given support fire. We were, not to say we won Valor Awards, but you know what I'm saying? It's like the Academy Awards. You can't really judge 5 different acting, performances. It's not apples with apples.
Well, I want to touch on that a little bit more and talk to the young folks, especially. I mean, there's people from all services listening to this, John, but the Marine Corps still is by far the most stingy on awards in peacetime and especially in combat. And I have learned, and I'm telling you young folks out there listening to it, that John is absolutely right. And there's a big difference between rubber stamping and giving everybody personal decoration, and then giving nobody and saying, well, that's what Marines do. We go out there and we bayonet people and we kill them, and he was just doing his job. It's the leader's role, his duty, to use judgment and maybe ask some more experienced folks, hey, look, I saw Sergeant Smuckatelli do this. I think this deserves recognition. What do you think? And chances are the older, more experienced guy is going to say, oh, yeah, that is not just doing your job. That one right there is above and beyond. We're going to write him up for something. The reason why I'm touching on this is it dovetails right into what you said, John. I talked to a young Marine that was in a rifle platoon in the 2nd Fallujah, which if we've done anything that rivaled Quay City, it was the 2nd Fallujah. I mean, these guys were going in houses and there was people barricaded and they wanted to die, And he told me, Mike, after the war, we had a couple platoon commanders and platoon sergeants shot out from underneath us. And then we got a series of replacements who only lasted like 4 or 5 days, and they rotated us. The bottom line is, we know that almost all of the staff NCOs and officers received combat awards for 2nd Fallujah. And to the best of his knowledge, not one enlisted Marine, other than the staff sergeant, received anything. And, if you know anything about that fight, it boggles my mind that a rifle platoon could go through that fight and not have at least a few guys that did something pretty significant, deserving of recognition. So, any thoughts on that?
No, I agree 1,000%. Look, there's probably people listening. A colonel that we both know told me the story in 91, the Gulf War, Kuwait, where they got there and they were staging. There was no enemy around. And a major was in some vehicle, a Humvee or something, and it accidentally shut on his hand. Mm-hmm. And he got somebody to write him up for a Purple Heart and a Silver Star. Now, he got the Purple Heart but didn't get the Silver Star. But and you know what I was going to say is junior enlisted guys, we don't even know about awards. When we were over there, we weren't thinking awards. Right. And we didn't know. I mean, my biggest goal was to get out alive and go back to college. That's so an award. I didn't even know I was in Way City till 20 years later. and the reason is, Vietnam is the only replacement war in our history of the United States where we went as individuals and came back. So we had no support system. We went and came back alone, and this was way before social media. So that was one thing unique about that war.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, John. I believe you were at General Smith's retirement ceremony. Mm-hmm. And I met you there, myself and another Marine, former Marine officer who had been lieutenants for then Lieutenant Colonel Smith. we just started talking to you about Way City, and I'll never forget the look on your face. And then at one point in time, you said, geez, I'm kind of stunned that you guys know so much about that battle. And I remember saying, are you kidding me? I mean, we've been studying that for years. I mean, that's the gold standard. And I don't think you were cognizant of that. To your point, you didn't even know you were there in such a famous battle for 20 years. And here you got a couple of young guys telling you, no, we studied the hell out of that. And we started relaying situations. Kind of surprised you, I think, that you participated in something very historic, and that to this day is taught in Marine Corps warfighting schools as this is no shit time right here.
Yeah, it's funny because people think I know people that were never in the military that know more about the Vietnam War. That just of interest to them. But if you think about it, we fought our way into Way City. I mean, it was horrific just getting in there. So I did not see a sign, "Welcome to Way." And I don't think I got wounded on the 21st, so I was there 22 days. And in the 22 days, I don't think anybody said we're in Way City. So it is, the fog of war in a lot of respects.
Yeah, I want to kind of change angles again, John. I don't know if it was you at that retirement ceremony or another Alpha Company Marine related a story that, after several days, little to no sleep and all that, everybody was just bone exhausted, just exhausted as hell. And I want to touch on that because that is a thing that I think a lot of, non-combatants, guys that haven't faced that test yet, that they don't have a feel yet for how just exhausted they're going to be. And how important it is to just be in the best health and physical condition you possibly can be at the start of it, because you're going to degrade pretty quickly. So if you're a slug going into it, you're in deep trouble on day 2 and 3 and beyond. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, our generation, we didn't work out. I don't think I ever went to a gym. And when we got to Vietnam, I was in college before I got kicked out. I was like 185. I was playing football. I went through Paris Island. I got out of there at 155. I came back from Vietnam at 113. And if you look at photographs of the guys in Vietnam, we look like POWs because I probably ate 3 hot meals in Vietnam. The rest of the time we were in the field with sea rations. But getting back to your point, when we got into Way City, we had to scavenge. We didn't take our packs because the intel on 31 January 68 was that we are the first reaction force to help a combined action group. We'll be back by noon. So none of us took our packs. I had wet socks from Quang Tri. I went into Way City with no socks, 1 bandolier of ammo. And once we realized, after about the 5th day of combat, day and night, you're right. You got to sleep. I don't remember sleeping. I know we had to sleep. I don't remember eating. I know we had to eat. And nobody does. When I talk about this with the guys here, we do not remember sleeping or eating, but we obviously did both.
Yeah.
But we scavenged because we were in French homes and we had no food. I scavenged weapons. Whatever we can scavenge.
Right. There's a lesson there, John, that I want to interject. So you guys were told, hey, just short-term mission. We're going to be back, by lunchtime. Essentially, we're going to be back soon. And I want to dovetail that. You've heard of the famous Somalia mission, the Black Hawk Down mission. And that's what the Rangers were told as well. Hey, look, we're going out, we're doing this raid, we'll be back in a few hours. In fact, they were told not to bring their body armor and some other things. And then other things they elected not to take. And so same thing, different war, many years later, but same thing. Hey, we'll be right back. Don't bring a full load. So they didn't. Next thing you know, they're trapped, for a couple of days, literally fighting for their lives. So for the young folks out there listening, the moral of the story is short-term missions often aren't. And it's better to have 10 bandoliers of ammo and not need it than one bandolier of ammo and thinking, holy shit, it's time to fix bayonets. Any thoughts, John?
Yeah, I mean, you can never have too much ammo. But you know what, Mike, you get cavalier. You're in Vietnam and you survived a month, 2 months, 3 months. Your survival instincts, in other words, you could not keep the heightened level of fear. Like when I first landed in Da Nang, I remember the plane door, I walked out, it was a searing heat, and we were in Air Force Base there. I was expecting to get shot. Then I loaded on trucks and went up to Quang Tri, and I was in the bush, and I expected to get killed that first. So you cannot maintain that fear level because then you won't be able to function. So you eventually become immune to certain things. Not careless, but it's sort of, like we had a saying, what are you going to do, shave my head and send me to Vietnam?
Yeah.
We were already there. So it was sort of fatalistic, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit, John, in the sense that I understand completely what you're talking about. You're there, you get used to it, you're kind of immune. Something that caused you to jump, a month ago, or already around hitting her mortars or something. Now it's just like you don't even turn your head to look at it. It's, no big deal. The problem is that can quickly, to individuals and units, that can cross over. There's a fine line between that and complacency. And as you know, complacency kills. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying complacency, but little tricks of the trade. You might go out on a night ambush. Now, remember, we were living like animals. We were in the field sometimes for 2-3 months without bathing, no hot chow. At Con Tien for 30 days, we lived in the mud. We literally had holes in the mud during the monsoons. And human being can get used to anything. So, like, for example, if we went out on a night ambush, we'd have one guy, we would be there, we'd have one guy or two guys watching, and the other two guys would nod off. And the reason is, you're out on a night ambush, or you go back in the morning, it's not like, work. You say, well, you worked the night shift. Why don't you guys go take a rest? So when you're in the bush, you sleep and eat and when you can.
Yeah. I want to start getting into the rare privilege that you had of serving in a unit with well, first of all, I think you view all of your mates and Alpha 11 as being special. But the fact is, you had the privilege of serving with some Marine Corps legends. I'll say that, and it's not a overly used word in the Marine Corps, but I'd say these guys qualify for it. So for those that are listening and not familiar, John had the privilege of serving with Sergeant Alfredo Gonzalez, who was killed in the battle and received the Medal of Honor. Gunnery Sergeant John Canley, who, as he said earlier, received a Navy Cross a couple years later, and then just about, John, a year and a half ago, it was upgraded, and he went to the White House and received the Medal of Honor for his actions, well-deserved. And then, was he a second lieutenant then? Second Lieutenant Ray Smith?
He was right. Let me tell you something. Ray was right out of the basic school when he joined us at Quang Tri. I had been,
So a boot lieutenant named Ray Smith, who, in full disclosure, went on to be my battalion commander for the Grenada Beirut float, and then, had an illustrious career, retired as a major general. So most people are lucky if they get to serve an entire 20-year career and be in a unit or an assignment with one person like that. And you got hit with the lucky stick. I mean, you got three of those guys in one unit, in one classic action. I'd like to start with Sergeant Gonzalez. Read a lot about him, heard a lot about him. Read an anecdote from General Smith. He said, when I got there, Ray said he was 21, and I thought Gonzalez was older than me. And my memory says that Gonzalez was a big, muscular guy. And then years later, I looked at a picture of me standing next to Gonzalez in Way City, and I towered over him. And so Ray Smith at the time was 6'2", 218, and during his senior year of high school, Gonzalez weighed 135. He was a football player, 135. So obviously there was a big difference, but what was it about Sergeant Gonzalez that made him project a presence, a physical presence, far beyond the reality of his build?
Yeah, Al was amazing. You forgot one other person, Gordon Batchelor, who a Navy Cross going in.
Absolutely.
And a Princeton guy, All-American football. But anyway, Gonzalez was quiet. In fact, he was so quiet, but a great leader, Naturally, he had a presence. I remember, being around him, and he wasn't, a shouter or anything like that. But what happened, his quietness, when Ray Smith took command as a second lieutenant of Alpha Company, which is normally a captain's billet, his first action, he went up to the gunny and said, "I'm replacing Gonzalez from 3rd platoon leader." I mean, Gonzalez had a whole platoon, 3rd platoon. We had no officers. We just had a couple in there, but he had 3rd platoon. And the gunny didn't speak much, but he said, Gonzalez got 3rd platoon. And Ray Smith said, he's just quiet. I don't know what he's going to do. And the gunny repeated, Gonzalez got 3rd platoon. And Lieutenant Smith said something else, and the gunny looked at the lieutenant and said, "Lieutenant, if you want me to go follow Gonzalez around, I'll follow him around. But he's got 3rd platoon, and if I should be with anybody, it should be with you."
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Ray Smith tells a story that his first act as a company commander was trying to relieve a Medal of Honor winner, because what had happened is there was only about 100 or so of us that went in, and for 3 days we had no officers.
Yeah.
So Ray Smith came in on the 4th day, and his first act was, and Gonzalez, the gunny was going to write Gonzalez up for the Medal of Honor for the first 3 days. So Ray jokes about it now, but going into Way, I watched Gonzalez, medevac, when I say medevac, pull people on his back, pulled them out of harm's way on Highway 1. He was just all over the place. And then what had happened is we finally get to within the city limits. They're about 200 yards away. And we were moving north on Highway 1. We were on the highway, the main highway. And we were getting a steady sniper and machine gun fire, automatic weapon fire from the west flank. On the right flank was a rice paddy, and the NVA had cut off portions of Highway 1 back to Fubai. So our only movement was north, and what we were doing was using a muddy ditch to leapfrog down the road from the fire at the west flank. All of a sudden, we get hit with machine gun position from the north. So we are in a crossfire, and we couldn't go back, and to go into the rice paddy was not good because you were in the open. So Gonzalez and Gunny Camley, and again, I don't remember any conversation. I remember seeing them jump into the rice paddy. They had, I think, a couple lost, around their back, and they had some grenades, and they leapfrog for 200 yards or something. They while these machine guns, it was hitting all around, and they got within 20 yards and eliminated these fortified NVA machine gun positions with hand grenades. And so you want to talk about Al Gonzalez, and Gunny Camley, and I had the honor to watch that.
Yeah, I heard that story. In fact, Colonel Smith, when he retired as a major general, told that story at his retirement. Very humorous. and there was a lot of lessons there worthy of me piling on what you've already said, John. So for the young audience, so second lieutenant shows up. He knows that he's got a sergeant in charge of a platoon that's supposed to be a lieutenant, no staff NCO, and he wants to change him out. And you've got a gunnery sergeant there, very experienced, who's already seen this sergeant perform heroically, and has already written down a little bit of cliff notes. He believes that Gonzalez has already done enough to deserve the Medal of Honor, yet he's got a fresh-faced lieutenant in his face telling him, I'm not so sure about him. That's what Ray Smith said. I'm not so sure about him. And he said, basically, he repeated what you said, that, you know, the gunny told him and all that. But the gunny was sitting there in the audience at the retirement. And, you know, Smith, with that Oklahoma drawl, he said, you know, folks, what the gunny was politely telling me was, Lieutenant, while you may not be sure about Sergeant Gonzalez, none of us are all that sure about you. And everybody started laughing, and he was poking fun at himself, like, what was I thinking? He was making the classic second lieutenant mistake of going in and making assumptions and on the verge of not listening to folks that had been there longer than him. And of course, he did listen, and the rest is history. He turned out to be an exceptional combat leader, but appearances aren't everything, and as you know that. And obviously, Sergeant Gonzalez, I mean, for someone like Smith to think that he was actually bigger than Ray Smith, and then to find out he was, I don't know, maybe 140 max in Vietnam. John, you saw him, I didn't. Something special,
Max, yeah.
Something special about that guy, because Smith was a physically large man. Now, he wasn't a gunny Canley, but he was a tall guy. He was a, you know, imposing presence in his own right. Does anything, aside from the stark heroism that he demonstrated on several occasions in front of you, what kind of leadership, I know he was quiet, what kind of leadership style did he have? Because he was obviously an effective combat leader, but it doesn't appear from what you're saying and what I've read that he was a screamer or a DI type or anything like that. Any comments on that?
Yeah, he led by example, but also when you asked me that question, something kicked in my brain, and what it was maybe I'm not saying it right. You sense that you would do what he say. It wasn't that he threatened you. It wasn't that, but maybe his seriousness when he gave an order, and then he led by example. And then the other thing is you watch other people. So when I got to Vietnam, the skinny on him was, you know, what a wonderful leader, and the guys in his platoon just loved him, and they reacted that. So you better get the hint of what's going on. And being around him, he was just a natural leader, but it wasn't like, you know, if he told you something, you did it.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the gunny Canley. I remember Lieutenant Colonel Smith telling our battalion's officers about Gunny Canley, big, beast of a man, and how in firefights he'd never seen anything like it. He'd look around, and Canley, for the first several long seconds, and you know how long they are, John, Canley would not hit the deck. He would be around running and yelling and directing people, making sure everybody's pointed in the right direction. And then after a bit, he realized, okay, it's not my day. It's time for me to get down. Smith said he'd never seen anything like it before. Just incredible competence, leadership presence, and just an abundance of courage. So I know I'm not doing it justice. I'm a little envious of you. I'm not envious that I wasn't in Hawaii City, but I'm envious that I didn't, get to serve with John Canley. So tell us a little bit about him, from when you first met him to when you were medevaced.
Well, I wrote a book called The Gunny,
yes,
and it's about him. And he didn't say much. He was quiet, and he never cursed. I've seen him chew out people, and you know what he would do when he would be chewing them out? He was soft-spoken. He would talk lower when he was chewing them out, which was more frightening than if he was screaming. We all could deal with the screaming. But he was a fatalist. So, and when I talked to him, you know, I don't know if you know this, but I'm the one that wrote his summary of action and citation for the Medal of Honor.
I did know that, yes.
Yeah. So I had to get statements from guys, and everybody had, it wasn't like 30 guys saw the same thing and tell the same thing about Canley, like he did this thing. It's that 30 guys have 30 different separate incidents where the gunny did something so heroic. You know, the charging a machine gun nest was just one.
Yeah.
Let me give you another example. On the fourth day, we were fighting the big battle at the St. Joan of Arc convent complex, and we were getting our lunch handed to us. There was in this building, and the NVA were shooting RPGs in the building. They had us outgunned and outmanned, and we were getting the snot. Canley gets a satchel charge. And I was near him when he said, "You stay here and shoot," you know. He climbs up on like a walkway, and the NVA can't pinpoint him, but they're shooting like hell in his direction. And he crawls to a position over the main company of NVA, drops the satchel, and that's how we captured the St. Joan of Arc. And that was a day's work. I mean, that was just one thing he did in that day. I mean, he could have had several Medal of Honors.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I was going to say, is it ironically, am I out of line in offering that maybe he rated several Medals of Honor for Hue City?
No, and it's funny because as I was doing the write-up, I thought about that, and what I decided on doing was upgrading his Navy Cross, and the paperwork took forever, but I thought he really deserves the Navy Cross and a Medal of Honor or two Medal. Yeah, I could give you story after story after story, like charging the machine gun nest and dropping the satchel. And another one where guys were getting hit. And there was 3-4 wounded guys in the middle of a road, and Canley went out and is dragging them all. I mean, everybody has a story where he has, Captain Stenslin, who was the first company commander in 67, talks about at Contienne, I think it was at Contienne, Canley within 15, 20 yards of the enemy, pulling wounded guys back. It just one on his shoulder, another one by the seat of their pants, and just calmly, just like there was no bullets flying.
Yeah, and unlike Sergeant Gonzalez, Canley was a large man, right?
Oh yeah, he's big. He's a big guy, and he's if you look at him, if you look at a photo, he's very intimidating. But he's a little teddy bear. I got very close with him in Vietnam because what had happened was at Hue City, I was language school. Ray Smith sent me to Vietnamese language school, and I had a Chu Hois. Going into the city, there was all kinds of civilians running around. So when the gunny took command of the company, he called me up and said, "I want you with me in case we captured or in case we had to, talk to some Vietnamese." So we spent basically, 3 weeks. I was right next to him, but I wasn't always next to him because he would do these daring stuff, and I would watch him go off. And
yeah.
But he's a wonderful guy, wonderful man.
Right. Let's talk about, I didn't mean to skip over then Captain and retired Colonel Batchelor. I've heard nothing but good things for him. He was seriously wounded in medevac. Was it the first or second day, John?
No, going in. He never made it into Hue.
Okay.
He had an AK. He got stitched with an AK-47, like 4 rounds. One took a chunk out of his arm, and one severed his femur. Okay. And the corpsman, God bless corpsman, the corpsman had no medical going in. There were so many dead and wounded. He had run out of medical supplies, and there was a truck there somewhere, and he used an entrenching tool to splint the leg. And I mean, and you talk about the ingenuity and adapt, improvise, and overcoming. It was amazing at Way City. That's just one example.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ray Smith. So Ray Smith, brand new second lieutenant. I think he had about a year or so as an enlisted Marine. They spotted him because he had a couple years of college and sent him to...
No, he had no college going in.
None?
He got... Yeah, he had several master's degrees later. Very bright. I mean, brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not know that. I thought he had a little college going in, but you're correcting me. And that's good.
Yeah, he played a little football. When I say a little college, if he did, it wasn't a semester or less.
Right.
But anyway, he came in and he came out of the box as Ray Smith. And an example, though, of how the distance between enlisted and officer is really cut down in that war. I don't know, that's the only war I've been in. When Ray came, I had a Chuhoy who didn't speak a word of English, and he was supposed to be 18. The kid was probably about 15, and he had American. We gave him American utilities, and the helmet was too big, and when you walk, it would. So what I did, evidently, and I don't remember doing this, but according to Ray, I thought I did it occasionally. He said it was almost every day. I would teach this kid something to say in English and go see the Lieutenant Smith. And I would, so I would follow him, and he would go up so proud. He marched. I told him to march, and the helmet's going up and down. And he came to Ray Smith, and he stood at attention, and he says, "Lieutenant Smith, you piece of dung, sir." I mean, he didn't always say sir. So Ray, and then I taught him to salute. So the kid would salute, Ray would salute back, and you know what? It's just something we did that was our thing, Ray and I. And he never, he never got mad. He never, but that's Vietnam. Every war has a different sort of feel to it.
I assure you, things are still the same with that. There's, with down-to-earth officers and staff NCOs, there's still room for things like that.
Yeah.
Tell me, so you're saying Ray Smith, again, the audience doesn't know Ray Smith for the most part. When you say he came out of the box, I assume what you're saying is, hey, what everybody else saw later on during his command and his time as an advisor and his subsequent combat time in Beirut and Grenada, that's the guy that we got right out of the basic school. It was that kind of combat leader. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about those traits, because obviously he was not your typical second lieutenant coming in.
No, he was great. And another quick story, but I'm going to talk about his heroism was we were doing a perimeter up at some air base, and the Army was 300 yards, inward, and they had the helicopter drop mountains of sea rations, and we were down to 2-3 a day. And in the middle of the night, I got a party, and we dragged all these cartons of sea ration back to our perimeter, and I didn't know it was a sandy area. So the next day the Army gets up and sees this trail and missing sea rations. So some captain comes and starts chewing out Ray that somebody, and he said, "I'll take care of it." And so he comes around and he said, "Did you take the sea rations?" I said, "Hell, I did, yeah." They had a lot. We didn't have, he laughed. He said, "Well, where's my cut?" And I don't know when you would get in trouble now for stealing sea rats, but
well,
Ray Smith.
You had to do what you had to do back then. That was not stealing. It was we were called combat acquisition.
Yeah, Ray Smith's first combat, he got there, I think, in October of '67. Was a terrible place to audition for combat. It was Cantien, and I don't know if you're familiar with the siege at Cantien.
Yes.
It was right on the DMZ. You could piss and hit the DMZ, and there were 3 battalions of NVA up there, and they would roll out the guns, the artillery in North Vietnam, and shell us, and then roll them back into caves. So we were getting 300 to 400 rounds a day of artillery and mortars. in the compound. Yeah. So we went outside the perimeter. Now, the 9th Marines had the month before us. We were rotating every month a new battalion in. And they lost a ton of people. They worked outside the wire, and I don't know, they lost a ton of people. So we went outside the perimeter one day, and Ray Smith was basically his first combat. We got hit in a L-shaped ambush, and people were, Ray, in his own words, talks about, you could see the smoke. We were so close to the enemy. We could see the smoke from the mortar tubes, and you can hear them charging rounds. This isn't me. This is Ray talking about his first combat. And he just performed brilliantly. I mean, Ray is calm. And your listeners should know one thing. If you ever get in combat, one of two things is going to happen. Things are going to speed up, or things are going to slow down. You want them to slow down, because Ray could see. He didn't have tunnel vision. He could see things. He can calmly make decisions, and he would do anything he asked you to do. He was, well, he's fearless. I mean, fearless.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you, obviously you were seasoned by the time you got there. How long did it take, John, for the rest of the company to realize this is not a normal second lieutenant? This guy is good to go. We're good with this guy. Was it days, weeks? How long before they realized?
Days. Yeah. Ray's got this, they think it's Southern, but it's Oklahoma. He's got this, and some people, and I know Ray, I'm in touch with him all the time. He's smart as a whip, but some people, thought, oh, golly shucks guy. He is, and he loves his Marines. I heard he didn't, he would much harder on junior officers when he was getting ranked than the junior. He loved the junior enlisted Marines, and he said something at his retirement that I'll never forget. If you were there, you might remember this. He said, I spent 30 years, and I'm not going to miss the Marine Corps. I'm not going to miss the people at headquarters. I'm not going to miss the bullshit. But what I'm going to miss is the Marines. He said, that's the Marine Corps.
Yeah, well, I agree. First of all, with the Oklahoma and good old boy, that's not shtick. That's just Ray Smith. But probably one of the most intelligent human beings, bar none, that I've ever met. So another case for don't judge the product by the wrapper. Not that he sounds dumb or anything like that, but he may come across to some people as, a farm boy and all that, but I'll tell you, that guy had an intellect second to none.
Yeah, he has a photographic memory. I do too, but no film, But he's brilliant. And he was nice. He was, Ray had the feeling you got from him is that he's the real deal, and the men loved him.
Well, I can dovetail on that, John, for the listeners. One of the things about being a good leader is you have to be consistent. And so you hear John saying about second lieutenant in Ray Smith in 1968. It was Lieutenant Colonel Ray Smith when I checked into 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines in 1984, or 83, February of 83. And, I met him and I didn't know who he was, but everybody that I met, I was like, well, who are you with? I'm with 2 weeks. Oh, you're in Ray Smith's battalion. I'm like, well, Lieutenant Colonel Smith to me. I didn't know who he was. And then, I started talking to some of the company commanders, and they started relating me that, no, this guy is like a Marine Corps legend. We are hooked up with this guy. And then I went to some Friday officer trainings where he was talking and giving his philosophy. And I had, been an enlisted Marine and experienced enough to know that this guy is speaking the truth. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. Some of the things he said to set the tone in our unit and all of that were so effective that I unabashedly stole them and used them for my Marines when I was in charge. The quotes and sayings he had and the mannerisms. And for some reason, you guys trusted him right away. And I'm telling you, he had a whole battalion like that. I see kids on Facebook now, so many years later, they did one enlistment. But when they talk about Lieutenant Colonel Smith, most of them don't even know he became a general. The love and respect and admiration and sheer reverence that they have for that leader is second to none. So we were both blessed on, years apart to be exposed to an extraordinary leader. And I am sure you agree, he played a role in your development as a man. And there's no doubt in my case, he played a huge role in my development as a leader of Marines. There's no doubt about that at all.
It's funny. I hadn't seen him in 20, 30 years, and we got back together. Like I said, we didn't have units and we didn't have social media. And I remember I was at Lejeune, and he was a major or lieutenant colonel, and I don't know what he was. But we went into the PX, and people were staring at him. They knew, like he was like a rock star. And I said, "What the hell did you?" Yeah, and. Because I don't know what he did, and believe it or not, I've served 2 years, 22 days. When I saw him, I didn't know medals. I knew a Purple Heart. All I knew is he had a lot of ribbons, but I didn't know what a Navy Cross was.
Well, so for those listening, Ray Smith received the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Bronze Star for Valor, and I think, John, 3 Purple Hearts.
Yeah,
2 or 3 Purple Hearts.
Yeah.
I believe that Ray was put up for the Navy Cross 3 times, and twice it was downgraded to Silver Stars, and the one that finally stuck as a Navy Cross was his acts of heroism while as an advisor with the South Vietnamese Marines. Late, I think around 1972 or so.
Well, what a story. Your listeners, they're being overrun. They were in a CAG unit or something, advisors, and their compounds are being overrun, and they're running out of bullets, and they're trying to escape, and Ray is the last man, providing cover, and then he throws himself on the barbed wire so the other Marines can use him as a bridge. This is right in his citation. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that.
No, we did know that. In fact, while he led those Marines to safety, he hooked up with another advisor who later became a Marine general, and that advisor was in severe heat exhaustion and was delirious. And Ray Smith told him, he tied one of his pack straps around that major's wrists and just said, "Major, just keep with me," And years later, that general came in to a professional setting in 8th Marines and told the crowd, "I am alive today because of your commander, because of Ray Smith, because he took me."
That's Walt Boomery, I think you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
Walt, yeah.
It surely is. So I guess the bottom line with Ray Smith is, I'm going to be 64 in a couple months, John, and I still want to be like him when I grow up. Time is running out, So, but listen, John, we're almost at the end here. I wanted to.
Well, let me say something about you. Ray Smith, Bruce Gumbar, and others called you the finest junior officer they had ever seen when you came as a second lieutenant. And Ray Smith was talking to Bruce Gumbar, and he said about you, and he said, "Who's the finest second lieutenant you've ever?" And Bruce said, "You," and he said, "No, I don't even come close to Mike Detour."
That's well, first of all, thanks for the kind words, and secondly, that's tall praise coming from the folks you mentioned, and especially Ray Smith. I was just privileged to be with him, blessed to be with him. I'm glad he has a high opinion of me. I hope I was worth it, but trust me, the debt is all one way in that equation, John. So I'm just happy to know him. Anything on top of that is gravy. I did want to give you an opportunity. We've only got a few minutes left. I want to give you an opportunity to tell us about your books and where listeners can read them. You're a prolific author, and I've read a couple of your books. They're great. Where are they listed at?
Well, you can get them on Amazon, or Simon & Schuster has, I think, 3 of my books. You can go, but Amazon. My latest book is called The Comey Gang, and it's about this whole fiasco with the FBI. I'm a retired FBI agent, and my heart's breaking over this stuff. I mean, we were like the Marine Corps. We were an institution of high integrity, and this idiot Comey has soiled us. But the Comey Gang has a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. If I'm going to recommend one of my fiction books, my favorite book that I wrote fiction is called The Near Enemy, and it's about counterterrorism, terrorists in the United States. And you can go on the Marine Corps Association and get the Gunny, which the Gunny talks about Gunny Canley, Ray Smith, Gonzalez, and Colonel Batchelor.
Yeah.
Through the Marine Corps Association.
I actually did read the Comey Gang, and if anyone out there wants to learn more about that situation that John described, it's an excellent tome from an insider. Well done, John, on that one. I'm going to pick up the Gunny. I've not read it yet, but I'm interested. I mean, I don't know Canley, but I wish I did, so to speak. But anyway, John, it's time to go. I really appreciate you sharing your insights and lessons with us. You did good for a college dropout. I'll say that. You had an admirable life, and I mean that. And the college dropout thing, and all jest. I mean, you've had an extraordinary life, and you've impacted no small number of people in your own right. And I know there's
Well, I wasn't really a dropout. I was expelled, and the irony is I am the alumni of the year in 2020 back at the college that kicked me out. And, of course, I have to mention that I was asked to leave 1966. I can't even do the math on that. But
well, you were a late bloomer, I guess. They didn't know what they had, a diamond in the rough,
Thanks. All right. Well, it's my pleasure, and thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, John. We are rounds complete for this episode.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at combatleadership.com. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient philosopher Plato. Only the dead have seen the end of war.